I pulled a bleeding stranger into my living room while gunshots still echoed down the street, and when he sat on my broken couch like he belonged there, I knew my life had just crossed a line I could never erase. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Not from the weight of him, though he was heavy, like gravity had suddenly shifted and decided to press itself entirely on my trembling arms, but from everything else, from the pounding sound of sirens crawling closer like some mechanical predator hunting us, from the metallic, coppery smell of blood mixed with rain and wet asphalt seeping in through the cracked window, from the chill that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the adrenaline clawing up my spine, from the sick realization that I had just chosen a stranger over my own safety, over the safety I had built around myself like fragile walls made of caution and careful habits. Every instinct screamed at me to drop him, to run, to slam the door, lock it, and disappear into my tiny, dimly lit apartment above the shuttered tailor shop without looking back. Every instinct, except the one that made me kneel and drag him across the slick, wet floor, ignoring the sharp scrape of concrete against his bleeding body. And now, even as I struggled to catch my own ragged breath, that instinct had me gripping his shoulders, gripping the edges of my life, trying to make sense of what the hell I was doing. I slammed the door shut behind us, a loud bang echoing into the empty hallway. My hands fumbled for the lock, fumbling as if my fingers had suddenly forgotten how to perform the simplest of tasks. I leaned my back against the peeling wood, the paint flaking under the pressure like it too was reacting to the tension in the room. My chest felt like it was being squeezed by invisible hands, and each inhale was shallow, jagged, desperate. I pressed my forehead against the cool door, willing my breathing to calm, willing the pounding in my ears to subside, but the sirens outside didn't care about my panic. They wove themselves into the night, relentless, mechanical, judgmental. "Sit," I whispered, my voice breaking despite my attempt to keep it steady. I could barely form the words. My lips trembled, the sound coming out like paper being torn slowly. "Please, just sit." I didn't know if I was begging for him to stay alive, for myself to stop panicking, or for the universe to somehow reset and make this entire moment feel less like a nightmare. He staggered toward the couch, that cursed couch with the sagging middle and the snapped leg I had once tried to fix with old books that were now dusty, crooked, and clearly inadequate. He moved slowly, each step deliberate, as if every ounce of energy was measured against some unseen ledger. My heart pounded so loud I could almost feel it under his chest as he moved closer, and I wanted to scream for him to stop, to stay still, to trust me, but I was terrified he might vanish, collapse, or, God, anything. He finally made it, his knee hitting the couch with a soft thud before he sank down fully, letting out a groan that seemed to carry the weight of the world. The couch responded in kind, creaking and groaning under him, protesting the intrusion like a living creature resenting our presence. I flinched at the sound, my stomach tightening, my hands shaking even harder as I realized I was responsible for this strange, precarious balance between man and furniture, blood and rain, safety and chaos. "I'm sorry," I blurted, almost tripping over my words. My voice felt like a fragile thread, cracking under the strain of the moment. It's broken. I mean, it still works, I guess, just, I couldn't finish. My mind was spinning. My tongue tied itself in knots, but somehow I forced it out anyway. I wanted him to feel welcome, even as the apartment smelled of wet rain, antiseptic from my first aid kit, and the tang of his blood mixed with my fear. He lifted his head slowly, like he was scanning the room, scanning me. Dark eyes, sharp and focused, alive in a way that made my chest tighten so much I thought it might collapse. There was a tension in those eyes, raw and urgent, yet also something distant, something unreachable. And yet, they lingered on me, and I felt as if he could see all the little fractures I kept hidden inside, the fears I had learned to swallow, the walls I had built around my life, the loneliness I had thought no one would ever notice. "It's fine," he said, voice low and steady, and the sound cut through my panic like a knife. Even soaked through the blood on his shirt, even exhausted, even half-collapsed onto my broken couch, there was something in the timbre of his voice that forced me to listen. "You didn't have to do this." My throat went dry. I swallowed, trying to swallow the lump of panic, guilt, and something else I couldn't name. "I know," I said. The words felt hollow, not because they weren't true, but because saying them didn't make the fear go away. It didn't undo the sirens, the blood, the rain, the impossible weight of responsibility. He shifted slightly, just enough for me to catch the way his muscles tightened under his skin, the way his hand brushed against the cushion, the way the sound of his breath seemed measured, almost careful, almost rehearsed. I realized then that he was alert, calculating. Even like this, vulnerable, bleeding, exhausted, he was measuring every inch of the space around him, every sound, every shadow, every heartbeat. I wanted to reach out and touch him, to reassure him that he was safe. But what could I do? I had a couch that might collapse, a tiny apartment that smelled faintly of damp books and anxiety, and a beating heart that refused to stop thudding like a drum in a war march. I bit my lip and let my hands hover in the air, trembling. "Do you want water?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My throat was tight. My chest still burned with that same relentless pressure, the same feeling that if I moved too fast or too slow, the world would collapse. He shook his head slightly, dark eyes flicking to mine for a fraction of a second, then away. "No," he said. And then, softer, almost a murmur, "I'll be fine." I didn't believe him. I wanted to believe him. And yet, I had no choice but to watch him settle more comfortably onto the sagging couch, adjusting himself with care so as not to break it entirely. It groaned in protest. I flinched again. "Sorry," I whispered, and he just shrugged, giving me that small, almost imperceptible smile, like he knew the couch didn't matter, like he was trying to reassure me more than himself. The rain outside pelted the windows harder, a relentless percussion on the roof, and the sirens were closer now, but in here, it was only the sound of my heart pounding, his shallow breaths, and the strange creak of the couch under him. I could feel my panic ebb and flow with every tiny movement he made, every subtle shift of his weight, every sigh that escaped his lips. You didn't have to," he said again, almost as if he was testing me, almost as if he needed to hear it twice to make it real. "I know," I repeated, this time firmer, though my hands still shook. "I didn't think." I stopped, because I realized saying it out loud would make me sound reckless. But he leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing, waiting, and I swallowed hard. "I couldn't leave you there," I said finally. I couldn't. His gaze softened slightly, the dark intensity ebbing just enough for a fraction of warmth to seep in. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but it made my chest ache, made the trembling in my hands seem almost bearable. And then, in that quiet, charged moment, I realized I was holding my breath, realizing perhaps for the first time in my life that the world could tilt on the edge of one decision, that choosing to act, even recklessly, even fearfully, could change the course of everything. I had made that choice. And now, as I watched him, as the couch groaned under his weight, as the rain hammered the windows, I wondered, just for a second, what would happen if I had failed. But I hadn't. He was here. Alive. For now. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that the sirens outside, the rain, the blood, and even the broken apartment were conspiring to remind me that danger was never far. Every shadow in the corners of the room seemed darker, every sound louder. I was hyper-aware of every movement, every twitch, every inhale that wasn't mine. "Are you going to be okay?" I asked finally, my voice small, trembling with more than just fear, trembling with the fragile, precarious hope that somehow, just this once, things might be okay. He didn't answer immediately. He just looked at me, dark eyes holding mine, holding the tension in the room, holding the moment like it was fragile glass. Then he nodded slightly. "Yeah," he said finally. "Thanks to you." I exhaled shakily, feeling a small, fleeting relief. But it didn't last. The weight of the moment pressed down again, heavy and insistent, reminding me that we were still on borrowed time, still on the edge of disaster, still trapped in a room that felt too small for everything that had just happened. And as I watched him settle further into the couch, I realized with a sudden, terrifying clarity that this night, this choice, would mark the beginning of something I couldn't undo. Something that would stay with me, in my chest, in my trembling hands, in the way my thoughts refused to stop spinning, long after the sirens faded and the rain finally slowed. And that was the truth. I didn't have to pull him out of that alley. I could have stopped. I could have walked away, turned my back on the chaos and the rain and the gunfire, let him vanish into the night like another shadow swallowed by the city. I didn't have to drag him through the rain, muscles trembling, soaked hair plastered to his forehead, while shots cracked behind us like thunder ripping the air apart. I didn't have to choose him. But I did. I acted before thought could tether me, before fear could clamp down and make my legs buckle. I acted because, in the instant I saw him lying there, bleeding, the world narrowed to one simple, impossible fact: he needed me. And somehow, for reasons I couldn't explain, I needed him too. I was just a girl trying to survive. 24. Rent always late, and sometimes I went a week eating little more than bread and water to make it stretch. A tiny apartment above a closed-down tailor shop that smelled faintly of mothballs and mildew. Its walls were thin, I could hear neighbors arguing through them, the thud of furniture being dragged, the laughter of people who had a life I couldn't claim. I worked evenings at a café that smelled like burnt espresso and desperation, where the machines hissed like angry snakes and customers snapped their fingers like I was supposed to be part of the decor. I knew how to keep my head down, how to walk fast, how to ignore trouble. I knew how to survive. Yet when he fell, when he hit the wet pavement with a sound that wasn't dramatic, like it wasn't a movie, just human and raw, I reacted before fear could stop me. Before my rational mind could list the reasons why I shouldn't. Before every warning that had ever kept me safe in this city could whisper its caution. I ran, ignoring the rain slapping my hair against my cheeks, ignoring the sting of mud in my eyes, ignoring the world that had never noticed me before now. "Stay awake," I said now, kneeling in front of him, pressing a towel to his side. My hands shook so violently I could barely keep the fabric steady. Blood soaked through instantly, warm and thick against my palms, sticky and heavy like it wanted to attach itself to me forever. My stomach twisted, my chest constricting as the world seemed to tilt around us, the sirens in the distance blending with the pounding of my heart. I swallowed the bile threatening to rise, forcing myself to focus, to keep him alive for just a few more seconds, just enough to make it inside my apartment, just enough to get him on my broken couch. His jaw tightened, muscles shifting beneath damp skin. "You should let me go," he said, voice low, hoarse from adrenaline, from pain, from whatever storm had followed him to that alley. The words were a warning, a plea, a test. I felt it like a tremor running through the air between us, a vibration of danger, of choice, of lines that shouldn't be crossed. "I'm not doing that," I said, surprising myself with how firm my voice sounded. Firm enough that even I could hear it, that even I could feel the spine-steadying edge to it. It startled me, the strength that rose in my chest, raw and unfiltered, as if the fear itself had been swallowed by the instinct to act. He studied me, tilting his head slightly, eyes dark and intense, scanning me as if he were trying to catalog every reaction, every heartbeat, every micro-flicker of fear and courage. There was something in the way he looked at me, a calculation, a fascination, a warning, that made my stomach tighten in ways I didn't expect. I felt exposed, like he could see everything inside me, my reckless compassion, my small apartment, my fragile courage. "What's your name?" he asked, voice softer now, almost curious, almost intimate, and the way he asked made the question feel like a thread dangling over a void. I froze. Giving my name felt dangerous. Intimate. Vulnerable. Naming myself here, in this room drenched with rain and blood and tension, felt like signing a contract I couldn't undo. I hesitated, my mind scrambling for excuses, reasons not to tell him, reasons to step back, to leave, to survive without further entanglement. But I couldn't. My throat constricted, but I forced the words past my lips, fragile and trembling. "I'm Emma," I said finally, voice barely audible over the rain and my own erratic heartbeat. "Adrian," he said after a beat, just one name, like a warning wrapped in calm, deliberate tone. No last name. Just that one word, dark and deliberate, like a lock sliding into place. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. The name hung in the air between us, heavy, dangerous, like it carried all the gravity of the night's chaos, all the weight of the choices we had made, all the possibility of what could come next, even if we didn't speak it aloud. I wanted to ask questions, impossible questions about him, about why he was here, why he had been shot at, why the alley had erupted with bullets just moments before I found him. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I stayed kneeling, pressing the towel to his side, listening to the rain hammer the windows, listening to the distant wail of sirens that seemed to echo our own racing hearts. "You shouldn't be here," he said again, almost to himself. Almost a whisper, almost a warning, almost a threat. And yet, there was a softness underneath it that made my stomach twist. His eyes flicked toward me, dark and calculating, scanning me as if he were trying to measure whether I belonged in this storm with him. "I know," I whispered. My voice shook, barely audible, barely holding together. I had to." He didn't answer right away. He just stared, quiet, the tension between us stretching and snapping and stretching again like a living thing in the room. I could feel it vibrating in my bones, in the spaces between my fingers pressing against the towel, in the way the couch groaned beneath him. Every sound was magnified, the rain, the sirens, the creak of floorboards, as if the universe had slowed to watch this choice, to watch this instant that shouldn't exist, that shouldn't feel like it did. "You're reckless," he said finally, voice low, measured, and somehow that single word sent a shiver down my spine. "You shouldn't have done this. And you shouldn't have ended up in my alley," I said, trying to keep the edge of my voice steady, trying to inject humor, trying to distract myself from the fear tightening my chest. My hands still trembled. My pulse raced like it wanted to escape. But the words were enough, for now, to keep the silence from consuming us. He shifted slightly, leaning on his elbows, still on the couch, still bleeding, still alive. "Maybe," he said. And then, almost softer, almost confiding, "But now, you've chosen. And so have I." I wanted to pull back, to leave, to retreat to safety. I wanted to curse my instincts for dragging me into this mess. But something in the way he looked at me, the faint curve of his lips, the dark glint in his eyes, the raw honesty in the curve of his jaw, kept me rooted, kept me kneeling there, unable to move, unable to let go. "Stay with me," I whispered. Not a question. Not a command. Just a breath, a thread, a desperate plea that I didn't even fully understand. My stomach twisted again as I realized how fragile this moment was, how easily it could shatter with one wrong move, one wrong word, one sudden sound outside my door. "I'm alive," he said finally, after a long pause, voice rough but steady. "Thanks to you." I exhaled shakily, the adrenaline in my veins screaming, my muscles trembling from the strain. "Don't thank me yet," I muttered, almost under my breath, though it came out as a laugh, shaky and uneven. "We're not out of the woods." He gave me that look, dark, intense, half warning, half question, and I felt something impossible stir in me. Fear, yes. But also, connection. Awareness. A strange, unspoken understanding that we had both stepped into something we couldn't undo, even if we wanted to. The rain outside battered the windows, a relentless percussion. Sirens still screamed in the distance, but in the small, fragile room, all I could hear was the way my own heart hammered in my ears, the way the couch groaned under his weight, the faint hiss of blood soaking through the towel, the shallow, deliberate intake of his breath. "You should tell me your last name," he said finally, almost casually, almost testing me. A statement that was more challenge than request. I don't think that's a good idea," I said, voice tight, voice trembling. My instincts screamed both yes and no at once. Naming myself fully felt like signing a contract with the night, with him, with the chaos that had followed him to my door. He didn't press. He didn't need to. His dark eyes softened just slightly, and I felt that same twist of danger and intensity wrap itself around me again, tightening like a vice I didn't want to escape. I swallowed, my hands still pressed to the towel, my body still kneeling in front of him, my mind whirling. And then, quietly, almost to myself, I whispered, "Emma." "Adrian," he said after a beat, just one word, heavy, deliberate, like a lock sliding into place. A warning. A promise. A beginning. And in that moment, kneeling on the rain-slick floor, hands trembling over warm blood, I realized something terrifying. Something dangerous. Something undeniable. That I had just crossed a line I couldn't uncross. And yet, I wouldn't move. I cleaned his wound the best I could, my hands trembling so violently it felt like the blood might drip off the towel and onto the floor in protest. The first aid kit I pulled from the kitchen shelf was half empty, the bandages crumpled, antiseptic almost gone, everything a little worse for wear. I wondered briefly if it was poetic justice that the one tool I had to save him was so inadequate, so much like my life, frayed, imperfect, barely holding together. His skin was warm under my fingers, sticky and slick with blood that had soaked through the thin fabric of his shirt. I pressed harder than I probably should have, hoping the pressure would slow the bleeding, hoping it would make some small difference. He didn't flinch much. Not even when I cleaned the jagged edges of the wound, not even when I dabbed the blood away, careful not to tear his skin further. That scared me more than the blood. Because flinching would have meant he was human. But the way he stayed still, stoic, almost detached, made me realize he wasn't just another person bleeding in my hallway. He was something else entirely. Something dangerous. And that danger made the blood on my hands feel heavier, like it had weight beyond the physical. When I finally finished, I leaned back on my heels, breathing hard, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. Every beat thundered in my ears. My palms itched, still sticky with the red warmth of his blood. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like someone had taken a flashlight and shone it directly on the most fragile parts of me. "You need a hospital," I whispered, voice breaking slightly as the words left my lips. It wasn't really a question. It was a plea. A command disguised as concern. He shook his head slowly, almost imperceptibly, his dark eyes narrowing just enough to make my stomach tighten. "That's not an option," he said, voice low and measured, almost a growl, a warning wrapped in calm. "Why?" My own voice sounded shaky, fragile. I could feel the tremor in it as it floated across the cramped room. My hands still tingled from adrenaline and panic. His eyes flicked to the window, to the darkened streets beyond, slick with rain and shadows. "Because they'd be waiting," he said simply. A chill crawled up my spine, slithering into every nerve ending. It wasn't the cold of the rain dripping through the poorly sealed window, or the draft that made the floorboards creak. No, it was the implication of his words. They, whoever they were already out there, waiting for him. For me. For whatever chain reaction this night had triggered. And just like that, my apartment, my fragile, imperfect sanctuary, felt tiny, inadequate, like a cardboard box in a storm. That should have been the moment I told him to leave. The moment I told him to vanish, to disappear into the rain, to stop endangering himself, and me. Every survival instinct screamed at me to do just that. And yet, my hands moved almost by themselves. Almost with defiance. I grabbed him a bottle of water, then boiled some tea, the steam curling around us like a fragile shield against the cold tension in the room. Then a blanket, frayed at the edges and faintly scented with laundry detergent and Old Hope, which I wrapped around him as carefully as I could. He tried to stand once, testing his strength, and cursed softly under his breath when it became immediately clear that he wasn't able. The curse was soft, intimate, almost human in a way that made me startle. I wanted to reach out to steady him, to make the world safe for him in the tiny ways I could manage. "Just stay," I said quickly, almost begging now, my voice louder than I intended. "Until morning. Please." My chest constricted, my throat tight, my hands shaking even as I adjusted the blanket around him. There was something in the urgency of my tone that I hadn't meant to show. And yet, there it was. He looked at me like he was weighing my life against his own, like the very act of staying under my roof was some impossible negotiation with fate. His gaze held mine, sharp and intense, and I felt my stomach twist at the raw assessment in his eyes. Every beat of my heart seemed to echo between us, loud enough that I was certain he could hear it, loud enough that I feared the pounding might give me away to whatever dangers lurked outside. "All right," he said finally, after what felt like an eternity of silence. The word was low, deliberate, but it carried with it the smallest hint of surrender, of trust, of acknowledgement that I had won, in some way, the right to keep him here. That night, I didn't sleep. Not really. I lay on my narrow bed, eyes wide, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar rhythm of another person breathing in my space. Each inhale, each exhale, seemed exaggerated, loud, invasive. Every creak of the couch beneath him made my chest jump. Every distant car door sounded like danger, every whisper of wind against the window like a signal of impending catastrophe. Why was I like this? Why couldn't I just walk away? I asked myself the question over and over, heart pounding in my ears, stomach twisting with guilt and adrenaline and something else I didn't recognize. Something dangerous. Something thrilling. I tried to imagine my life as it had been before, rent always late, work at the café, small victories and minor failures, but the image shattered every time I heard the soft exhale of his breath, the faint rustle of the blanket, the subtle shift of his weight. My mind betrayed me, spinning images of what could go wrong, and yet also what could stay right. Morning light crept in pale and forgiving through the thin curtains, washing over the apartment in muted gold. It illuminated the dust motes drifting lazily through the air, tiny fragments of time suspended, unnoticed, as if the world itself had paused to witness what had survived the night. And there he was, Adrian, sitting upright on the couch, shoulders tense but composed, watching the dust float like it meant something, like it held the weight of meaning itself. "You didn't run," he said quietly, voice low, almost surprised. The words cut through the haze of morning light, and I felt their weight sink into me like a stone settling in water. "I thought about it," I admitted, voice tight, my throat constricted as the truth slipped out. I thought about it. I wanted to run. But I didn't. Why didn't you?" His eyes met mine, dark and searching, and the question seemed heavier than the air, heavier than the sunlit dust floating between us. It carried a weight of curiosity, danger, and something else, something I couldn't name, and didn't want to. I shrugged, throat tight, heart pounding. "You looked like you wanted to live," I whispered, barely audible, yet it resonated in the stillness. My words felt fragile, imperfect, like a candle struggling against the wind, but they were true. Every instinct, every pulse, had screamed at me not to leave him there. Something flickered across his face. Pain? Gratitude? Regret? I couldn't tell. But it was there, a shadow, a movement in the dark waters of his expression. And it was enough to make my stomach twist again, a familiar knot of fear and relief and something dangerously close to longing. The room was quiet except for our breathing, except for the faint tick of time that moved forward no matter what choices we had made. My hands rested limply in my lap, still sticky from the night's events, still trembling from adrenaline and exhaustion. I was aware of every inch of the apartment, the peeling paint, the tiny piles of laundry, the faint scent of tea and blood and old detergent mingling in the air. Every detail was magnified, heightened, a silent witness to the fragile, dangerous truce we had established. He shifted slightly, a small movement that made the couch creak under him, and my chest clenched. He could leave at any moment, and yet he hadn't. He was here. He had chosen to stay. I tried to swallow, tried to calm my racing heart, but it was useless. I was acutely aware of every heartbeat, every breath, every tick of time passing between us. My life felt suspended, a fragile thread stretched over chaos, and I couldn't tear my eyes from him, from the dark intensity in his gaze, from the quiet acknowledgement that something had changed irrevocably. Days passed in a strange, fragile routine, a rhythm that was equal parts delicate and dangerous. Each day felt suspended between chaos and comfort, like the world had paused outside my apartment walls, leaving only the two of us and the faint tick of time, marking the moments like tiny heartbeats I could barely trust. He stayed hidden, almost like a shadow, but a shadow that occupied the air differently. It wasn't just that he was here, it was the weight of him, the presence of him, the way he existed in my small apartment like a storm contained in fragile glass. I brought food every day. Small meals, humble offerings of what I could afford, bread, tea, eggs, the occasional leftover from the café that wasn't quite cold yet. Each time I set a plate down in front of him, my hand trembled. Not entirely from fear, though there was that too, but from the strange, potent electricity that buzzed between us, that grew thicker with every interaction. He didn't reach for it immediately, waiting as though testing my intentions. And when he finally ate, he nodded, his dark eyes flicking to mine for just a moment. That moment lingered, heavy and weighted, as if we had exchanged something unspoken, something that made the hair on my arms stand on end. He fixed the lamp without being asked, movements deliberate and careful, almost reverent, as if touching something fragile demanded respect. Every gesture was calculated, but gentle, like he was aware that even small things mattered here. The lamp's soft glow returned, painting the room in a forgiving light, and I found myself noticing things I hadn't before: the slight curve of his shoulders, the way his hands moved as though used to controlling more than just furniture, the way he breathed deliberately, not to disturb, but to coexist. When I apologized for the couch again, my voice soft, almost breaking under the weight of my embarrassment and the lingering fear from our first night, he laughed softly. It wasn't a loud laugh, not a boisterous sound that demanded attention. It was a low, intimate sound that seemed to roll over the room like warm water, a ripple that unsettled and comforted at once. "It's honest," he said, voice low, calm, like he was revealing a secret I wasn't supposed to hear but needed to. "Doesn't pretend to be something it's not." That line stayed with me long after, echoing in the corners of my mind like a refrain I couldn't escape. I found myself staring at the couch when he wasn't looking, at the uneven cushions, the sagging frame, and realizing how much I'd come to like its imperfections. It was a mirror of him in some strange, unspoken way, rough, scarred, but unpretentious, grounded in truth. He was gentle in ways that felt dangerous. Every smile, every slight nod, every faint flicker of warmth behind his eyes carried the weight of unpredictability. I never knew if it would become a shield or a weapon, and that uncertainty made my heart race in ways I hadn't thought possible. He thanked me every time I handed him something, every time I offered a cup of tea, every time I set down a plate of food. The gratitude in his voice was quiet but intentional, like a prayer spoken just for me, and it made me ache. He listened when I talked about my shifts at the café, about the rude customers who expected the world on a silver tray, about my aching feet, about the bills piling up in neat, careless stacks on the counter. No one had listened like that in a long time. The kind of listening that didn't just wait for you to stop talking so they could speak. It was a listening that held the space around you, like he was guarding something fragile, like he knew that words had power and he didn't want to waste them. Every evening, tension coiled tighter inside me. It was a serpent in my chest, twisting and writhing with every glance, every accidental brush of his hand when he adjusted something on the couch, every word he said with that soft gravity. I felt myself walking on a knife's edge, aware of every movement, every sound, every heartbeat in the apartment. Even the faint groan of the floorboards beneath his weight carried significance, as though every small sound was a signal and a code only I could read. I caught myself noticing things I wasn't supposed to. Small, insignificant details that suddenly felt monumental. How his sleeves rode up to reveal old scars, pale against the dark canvas of his skin, jagged lines that hinted at stories I didn't dare ask about. How his voice softened when he said my name, each syllable deliberate, weighted, as if it had been polished to perfection in the quiet moments between danger and necessity. How he always chose the edge of the couch, as if he didn't want to take up too much space, as if he had learned long ago that presence could be dangerous, that claiming it could bring consequences he wasn't willing to pay for. I hated how much I wanted him. It wasn't just attraction. It wasn't just the magnetic pull of danger, or the way his eyes seemed to pierce right through me. It was the way he existed so fully, so unapologetically, in a world that often demanded compromise and suppression. And me, small, tired, barely surviving, felt pulled toward him like a moth to flame, knowing the danger, knowing the risk, but unable to resist. "You should be scared," he said one night, voice barely above a whisper, carrying across the apartment like a fragile thread. I froze, every muscle in my body tightening, every thought sharpening. The words weren't a question, weren't an accusation, they were a statement, a fact that seemed to hover in the air between us, cold and heavy. I said, voice low, trembling. Honest. The truth reverberated in the empty corners of the room, mingling with the soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant rumble of city traffic, the faint drip of water somewhere in the pipes. Just not of you. That was the problem. It was the problem because it wasn't supposed to be like this. Because I was supposed to survive, to protect myself, to maintain the fragile structures I had built around my life. Not invite chaos in. Not notice the subtle flex of his muscles, the ghost of a scar, the curve of his lips when he smiled at something I said that barely mattered. Not watch the way he existed so fully in a world that demanded compromise and be drawn to him like gravity itself had shifted. And yet, there I was. Kneeling beside him, adjusting a pillow, fetching tea, watching him like he was the only thing in the universe that mattered. Every heartbeat felt magnified, every breath was deliberate, every glance carried weight. I noticed the faint lines etched around his eyes, the way his hair fell across his forehead, damp from some previous movement, as if he'd been running from a storm too large to name. Every day blurred into the next, yet somehow each day felt like a lifetime compressed into a single fragile instant. I measured time by his breathing, by the movement of his hands, by the small rituals that made him feel human in this otherwise impossible situation. The tension coiled tighter inside me with every shared meal, every laugh, every quiet acknowledgement. It became a living thing, a serpent curling around my ribs, squeezing my lungs, reminding me that desire and danger were entwined, that comfort and fear were indistinguishable, and that nothing about this situation was simple. I hated that I wanted him. Hated that the sight of him leaning against the wall, fixing a lamp, adjusting a cushion, could make my chest ache, my hands tremble, my stomach twist with anticipation and fear. Hated that every smile he gave me carried a weight that made me dizzy, that every casual brush of his hand made my mind reel with possibilities I didn't dare entertain. "You should be scared," he repeated one night, his voice a whisper that grazed my ears like the faint brush of fingertips. There was no malice in it, no threat beyond the recognition of danger that I already felt in every bone. I said, meeting his gaze, trembling slightly. "Just not of you." And that, quiet, simple, honest, was the problem. It meant I had already crossed the threshold, meant that the danger, the intensity, the unspoken rules of this fragile, dangerous cohabitation had claimed me more fully than I was prepared to admit. He didn't answer immediately. Just watched me, dark eyes steady, heavy with something unspoken. And I realized that even in silence, even in small gestures and whispered words, the tension between us was a living, breathing entity, alive in the creaking of the floorboards, in the faint scent of tea and laundry detergent, in the heartbeat echoing through my chest. I hated it. I hated it with every ounce of rationality I had left. And yet, I was utterly powerless to resist. The closer we got, the louder the warnings in my head became. My instincts, honed over years of living quietly, trying to stay invisible, screamed at me to step back, to close the door, to shut him out before it was too late. Every muscle in my body tensed at the smallest shift, the way his shoulders stiffened, the way his eyes hardened when a neighbor's dog barked, the way he checked the door twice before letting himself in, like he expected danger to be lying in wait. I could feel it in my chest, a deep, insistent drumbeat of caution, of fear, of awareness that this man was not just a stranger in my apartment, but a force too large for my life, too dangerous for my fragile routines. I knew instinctively that there were walls he had built that I was never meant to cross, that there were secrets in his eyes that would fracture everything I thought I knew about the world, and myself, if I got too close. And yet, I was drawn forward, pulled by something I couldn't name, couldn't resist. Something in the way he moved, the quiet gravity he carried in every step, the faint scent of danger that clung to him even in my tiny, ordinary apartment. Then I found the jacket. It was draped over the chair by the window, unremarkable at first glance, heavy with the weight of fabric, worn at the elbows. But when I lifted it, my fingers brushed against something cold and hard, something that made my stomach lurch. The gun. It was heavy. Too heavy. I could feel the cold bite of it through the leather as my hands shook uncontrollably. The weight was final, absolute, a reminder of everything I had ignored, everything I had let myself feel despite the danger. My breath caught in my throat, uneven, ragged, as the reality of the object pressed down on me, both physically and emotionally. When he saw it, the color drained from his face. His jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw something crack in the armor he wore so carefully. There was vulnerability there, raw and unguarded, and it made my pulse race in a mixture of fear and fascination. "Tell me the truth," I said, my voice breaking, soft and trembling. A tremor ran through me I could not hide. "Please." He exhaled slowly, deliberately, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to carry the weight of everything he had never said. His eyes dropped for a moment, dark and unreadable, before meeting mine again with a quiet, deadly intensity. "I run things," he said. Each word was deliberate, slow, like a hammer striking against fragile glass. "Bad things. I was supposed to be dead." The statement hung in the air between us, heavy and final, echoing off the walls of my apartment in ways I could feel in my bones. My heart cracked open at the confession, splintering into pieces I didn't think I had left. I had imagined danger before, felt it in fleeting moments of survival, but this was real, intimate, absolute. It wasn't abstract. It wasn't distant. It was here, inside my apartment, in the quiet thrum of our shared space, in the way his eyes lingered on me, searching, assessing, almost apologetic. "Why stay?" I asked, barely able to breathe, barely able to string the words together through the tremor in my chest. The question felt small in the face of everything he carried, insignificant compared to the weight of the life he led, the secrets he bore, the danger that followed him like a shadow. "Because you saw me as human," he said, voice low, thick with something I couldn't name. A confession, maybe. An acknowledgement. And I forgot how dangerous that is. I should have stepped back. I should have told him to leave, to vanish into the night, to let me survive the small, fragile life I had built. But instead, I stepped closer. Each step was deliberate, measured, and yet my chest tightened with every inch I closed. My heart pounded against my ribs like it wanted to escape. My hands itched to touch him, to prove to myself that he was real, that he wasn't a shadow conjured by adrenaline and fear. I felt exposed, unarmored, completely vulnerable in the presence of a man who carried so much danger in every movement, every glance, every breath. That was the beginning of the end, and the beginning of everything. Our almost kisses became torture. Every brush of his fingers against mine, every accidental closeness on the couch, every lingering look carried the weight of something forbidden. Each moment was charged, electric, dangerous, and yet irresistible. The tension between us tightened like a coiled wire, humming in the small space of my apartment. Our silences screamed louder than words ever could. When he said nothing, my mind filled the void with impossible possibilities. Each pause became a drumbeat, a countdown, a warning that the world outside could never understand the danger that existed in the quiet space between us. I became acutely aware of every inch of his presence, the subtle rise and fall of his chest, the way his shoulders shifted when he settled against the edge of the couch, the faint scent of him lingering in the air long after he had moved. Every touch felt stolen, forbidden. Even the slightest brush of his hand against mine made me flinch and crave it at the same time. It was a paradox, a torment that wrapped itself around me, tightening with every heartbeat. I knew, deep down, in the marrow of my bones, that loving him could ruin me. Could shatter the fragile life I had worked so hard to construct. And yet, the desire clawed through my restraint, unstoppable, unrelenting. Why couldn't I stop? The night I overheard his phone call, the fragile tension between us shattered into sharp fragments that cut through everything. I had been standing near the doorway, pretending to rearrange something, when I caught the words. "She doesn't know," he said, urgency threading every syllable, low, almost a whisper. "She can't." Time seemed to freeze. The air grew heavy, saturated with the knowledge of betrayal, danger, and secrets I had no right to untangle. I wanted to run, to scream, to shake him until he answered, but I didn't move. My body betrayed me, frozen in place, heart hammering, pulse racing in a chaotic rhythm that matched the panic in my chest. When he turned and saw me, the mask he wore cracked, even if only for a moment. I already knew, already understood that this revelation, this hidden truth, was more dangerous than I had imagined. The eyes that had once been warm, almost tender, were now wary, protective, almost sorrowful. He left that night to protect me. I watched from the window, every instinct screaming for me to follow, to grab him, to make him stay. But I couldn't. I knew, somewhere deep inside, that following him would only drag me deeper into the chaos, into the darkness he inhabited so naturally, so completely. And I broke that night because of him. I crumpled into myself, collapsing onto the narrow bed, trembling, chest heaving, the weight of everything pressing down on me like a physical force. Tears ran unchecked down my cheeks, hot and sharp, a stark contrast to the cool, heavy darkness of the apartment. I pressed my face into the pillow, inhaling the faint scent of detergent and dust, feeling simultaneously the fragility of my own existence and the vast, dangerous pull of his life that had intersected with mine in a way I could never undo. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to curse the chaos he had brought into my quiet, imperfect life. But the truth was undeniable, impossible to escape. I had opened myself to him completely, and now the consequences were unavoidable. I wanted answers. I wanted safety. I wanted him to return, but more than anything, I wanted to understand how it was possible to feel so tethered to someone so dangerous, someone whose life could destroy mine with a single decision. And even as I wept, even as my heart shattered in the silence, I knew this was only the beginning. The revelation of his truths, the weight of his secrets, and the undeniable, magnetic pull between us had changed everything. I could never unsee what I had seen, could never unknowingly live in ignorance again. I lay there, trembling, every nerve alive with tension, every thought consumed with him, the man I shouldn't want, the man I shouldn't trust, the man who had become the axis around which my fragile world now revolved. Every whisper of memory from that night, every look, every word, every brush of his hand haunted me in the dark. And still, I wanted him. When he came back days later, he wasn't the same. He was softer. Determined. Free. I chose you, he said. Even if it costs me everything. We sat on my broken couch again, hands intertwined, city lights bleeding through the window. I wasn't supposed to love you, I whispered. I know, he said, pressing his forehead to mine. But you feel like home. And for the first time in my life, danger didn't scare me. Because love, real love, never comes safe.